Hey guys, Buildzoid here from Actually Hardcore Overclocking, and today we're going to be talking about load line calibration. And I can't write very fast, so this is going to be very painful. So load line calibration, also known as LLC for short, is a setting available on basically all high-end motherboards and most mid-range, as well as... I'm not sure, I don't use that many low-end boards, so I'm not sure if it's most or some. But basically, if your motherboard supports overclocking, it should probably have load line calibration settings. Now, load line calibration settings are not the most important thing until you're in a situation where you can absolutely max out the core voltage for your CPU pretty much. So you're on a cooling system that can handle the maximum safe voltage for your CPU. If you're on a weaker cooling system, you basically don't have to care about this because VDroop is there to protect you.
Before getting to that, this coverage is brought to you by EVGA and NVIDIA with the Destiny 2 1080 Ti bundle. The 1080 Ti SC2 comes with asynchronous fan control for its dual fans, 9 thermal sensors, and again includes Destiny 2. Learn more at the link in the description below.
So let's actually talk about, well, VDroop doesn't really have any negative impacts on you unless you're like starting to push up against the edge of max safe voltage. And you'll see why that is very soon. Before we get into that, we need to define some things. So first of all, what on earth is, what is load line calibration? Well, it's made up of load line and calibration. And the load line is this magical thing, which is actually, it's not actually like a physical, it's not a physical phenomenon or anything. It's a VDroop specification. Basically, it looks like if you have a graph where one line is current, one side is voltage, there would be 0. That right here is your load line. That's a load line. Yeah. And you might be wondering, what on earth does that mean? Well, it's a simple way of defining a VDroop sort of adaptive VCore, like an adaptive voltage VDroop system, very simply. Because essentially, as your current increases, your voltage decreases. So if you're at idle and the VRM is outputting only 10 amps, you might be at like, you know, say at this point on the line. And none of this will be on to scale. And that point might be 1.3 volts, right? And vid might be 1.35. Like here, vid... This point is pretty special because it's vid equals vcore at that point. But then you start doing some intensive rendering or something, and you go to this point over here. That point is at, say, 60 amps. That's realistic for full load. And your voltage might drop down to 1.24 volts. Which these are completely arbitrary figures, but you get the idea here. Well, actually, it would be more realistic if it was 1.25 volts. And what you're seeing here is because I decided that vid is going to be like that up there is going to be 1.31 volts. And essentially, this means that you have a load line of 1 milliohm, because for 60 amps, you're getting 60 millivolts of droop. So this is a way for Intel to define how much your core voltage should be decreased at increased current levels. And you might be wondering, like, why on earth would you want to lower the voltage as the CPU goes under load? Well, one, it makes sure that the CPU uses less power, so you stay within TDP. Two, it puts less strain on the VRM because the CPU uses less power. Three, it keeps you in voltage tolerance levels, which is actually the main reason why this is done. Because as CPUs and everything is just like, well, CPUs get finer and finer manufacturing processes, they get more and more voltage sensitive, and Intel's also been like pumping up the, you know, the efficiency has been going up as well. So load line has been used to basically make sure that all of that works as well as possible. And the voltage tolerance thing is basically comes down to this scenario. If you have voltage here, and this lower graph will be current, and we're looking at these over time, you might see something that looks like your current level might go like that. And you're going to see a voltage graph that looks like, and we're going to say we have like an oscilloscope here. So very accurate measuring tool. And then you're going to see a big voltage dip, and then you're going to see increased ripple until you get to the point where the VR, like the current draw, drops off, at which point you're going to get a voltage spike, some ringing, and then returned ripple to to this level of ripple. And so load line, having the load line allows Intel to basically grab this entire section right here, take all of that, and, they want that VRM output voltage never exceeds this level, right? This is the voltage you must never exceed. So they can grab this entire chunk here, which is going, it's going out of spec here, and they can just drag it down. So that because if you looked at your if you had a multimeter on this, right, you would see a flat line, because this would be V average, right? So you'd be seeing an average voltage that's completely flat. And then but with load line, you would see something that looks like this in terms of average voltage. Right, and this dip down here basically would take this spike and push it down, as well as also push all of these spikes down. So if actually, if this line over here that I drew was lower, these spikes would also go within tolerance, because now your average voltage is lower and your VRM is aiming for a lower voltage output, and your ripple is now in spec and you're not overshooting as hard. So that's why load line exists. Now we're going to talk about why it's actually really annoying and why the load line calibration setting is so helpful when overclocking, because, it's rather simple, right? Imagine this scenario. We have a CPU, we have an i7 4790K. Why I chose that one? And no, let's go modern. You have an i7 77, and nope, more modern. 8700K. I like my upgrades. And 6 cores. So you have your i7 8700K, right? And the maximum voltage recommended for this is 1.45 volts. And so you decide that you're going to set and you have the CPU delidded, you have a giant water cooling loop, and you decide that, okay, I'm going to go and, well, actually, you wouldn't even need a giant water cooling loop if it's delidded, but it's delidded and you have a good cooling system on top of it. And you decide that, yeah, I'm going to run 1.45 volts through the CPU. So you set your voltage setting, which on most motherboards would just be the vid. You set that to 1.45 volts. So you set that to 1.45. And then you get a voltage reading of, you get VCore, we'll have actual VCore readings here. And I'm sorry that I didn't prepare tables for this, but I think it makes sense to just draw it out like that. Well, I don't know if it makes sense like this. I don't know anything about video production, so deal with it. I'm here to teach you about load line, not how to be a good presenter. So you have your vid, you have your idle, and you have your load VCore. And your idle VCore on stock load line, well, actually, let's add the LLC, right? Load line calibration would be stock. Then you have your VCore levels. And here you have idle. And here you have load. Right? And idle, you'd be seeing, say, 1.445 volts. And you wouldn't actually see 1.45 because, remember, the only time you would ever see 1.45 is if you're, if you're at 0 amps current output. Since you're not at 0 amps current output, there's going to be a little bit of droop. Right? So you're drooping a little bit off of that 1.45 volts target. Now, you go and you start up the render, and your voltage drops all the way down to 1.35 volts. That's atrocious. That's terrible. That significantly limits how much you can overclock your CPU, because your voltage that defines your max overclock is this, right? This is what limits your maximum overclock. Now, if you're on a weaker cooling system that can't actually cool 1.45 volts, this is great. This is awesome because you can idle on 1.4. You can idle on just under 1.45 volts all day, and then you go under full load, and you're at 1.35 volts. So the heat output of your CPU isn't high enough to actually overload your heatsink. But and you know, you might complain about the high idle voltage, but if you just enable C states and like there's a few automatic power saving settings that if you just leave them turned on, it won't, like, your idle voltage won't be that high, as well as your idle clock won't be maxed out all the time. And when you go under like light load where you need full CPU speed, it will go up to all the way up to this, but it won't be like idle. It'll be like mid load or medium load or lightish loads. So this would be perfectly fine if you know your heatsink can't actually cool more than 1.35 volts. But we just established that our cooling system here is not the issue. So we need to go fix this, because this is severely limiting our overclock to only 4.9 gigahertz, which really isn't that rare. Most of these chips should be hitting over that. Actually, no. Wait a minute. 4.8 gigahertz. It's limiting us to 4.8 GHz, which this is not high enough. 8700Ks should regularly hit 5 gigahertz if you can push 1.42 volts into them. So we're going to throw some LLC at it. 1.45 volts. And we're going to set our LLC to flat, because I've not... Well, there's a few motherboards out there, like really good extreme overclocking motherboards are starting to come out with LLC settings that can actually get you basically completely flat voltage output. But most motherboards can't do flat. But let's say you get a motherboard that does flat, and now you're getting 1.45 volts idle, 1.45 volts load, and you're getting your 5 gigahertz. Awesome! Great. So this is why you want your load, you know, why you need the load line calibration setting. Now the problem is, this right here, not realistic. Okay, I've tested a lot of motherboards. Well, okay, not that many. I'm not a full-time motherboard reviewer, but I've used a lot of motherboards. And I've not seen a lot of motherboards where your voltage does this. Like, this is really rare. Usually what you actually see is... What you actually see in terms of actual load lines that you would see... Here's just an example graph. So if you looked into a BIOS for some motherboard, right, you would see something like stock. So that would be S. Then say low, medium, and then, you know, this is what we'd want. This is our flat. This is what we're aiming for. And then you get high. And high LLC gives you just the smallest amount of boost. And then you get very high, which gives you even more boost. And then you get extreme. And most motherboards with an extreme LLC setting go way out of whack. And basically the end result is like, if you were to set 1.45 volts and then put the LLC to extreme, you end up in a situation where you're idling on, say, 1.47 volts, because remember, you're never at zero. You might be somewhere up here on the curve, right, at idle. And then you go to full load, and you're here on that line. And when you go to full load, you suddenly get 1.57 volts, right? That kills chips. That's really bad. You don't want to be running that into your CPU long term at all, right? If this was a workstation and you configured your... And the funny thing is, this would probably let you run 5.1 gigahertz, right? It would actually allow you to run a higher frequency. It might even let you do 5.2 in some cases. So you have this 5.1 gigahertz overclock. You think you have it at 1.45 volts, but the reality of the situation is you're getting 1.47 volts at idle, and then you're getting 1.57 volts at under full load. And if this was a, you know, as I said, a work machine where, you know, you render video on it for a couple hours every day, you can say bye-bye to that CPU in like 6 months. In 6 months, that CPU is no longer going to be able to run 5.1 gigahertz at one, like, it's not going to, like, you're going to lose that 5.1 gigahertz overclock. You're probably going to lose the ability to do 5 gigahertz at 1.45 volts completely as well. You might end up in a situation where your CPU goes from, 1.45 load and 5 gigahertz to 4.8. So that would cause degradation. If you decided to keep that, like if you just lowered your frequency and kept the insane LLC setting, over time, it would probably just straight up destroy the CPU to the point where it doesn't run at all. And unfortunately, there's no really good way of knowing, well, some motherboards you'll get lucky and they'll have a good software voltage readout. And then there's some motherboards where the software voltage readout is completely idiotic and I don't know what it's doing. Okay? And that makes things very, very difficult. And overall, I would say if you don't have the necessary skills and knowledge on how a motherboard works and how to take voltage measurements on a motherboard, don't go above medium LLC. Just don't. Because once you go above medium LLC, things tend to, like, these days, more modern motherboards I've noticed aren't that bad. Even, like, surprisingly cheap ones, I haven't noticed one where the extreme LLC was this extreme. But in the past, I have run into motherboards where extreme LLC was, well, pretty damn extreme and completely unsafe for normal operation as a result. And I've never really run into any motherboard where the medium setting would be this stupid, right? It wouldn't be unsafe levels of overvoltage under full load. It wouldn't even, and typically it would droop you a little bit. And in my personal testing and everything, if I am doing any kind of overclocking for daily usage, and I do actually have full voltage measurements for the motherboard, then I'll still intentionally set up the system to droop a little bit. So, I might go for 1.45 volts medium, and then I get 1.45 idle because, medium LLC is starting to get to that point where we're almost at that flat line. Like that's not actually a realistic medium. I've seen mediums that look like that, basically. Though, again, it depends on what kind of scale we have. If this was 400 amps here, then the scale is, that extreme is not extreme enough, probably. But, so medium LLC, and then it would just droop down gently to, say, 1.43 volts. And this is something I would run daily, no problem. This is pretty much ideal. At that point, I actually lowered the core voltage a little bit so that we get that, 1.42, which is where most 8700Ks would hit 5 gigahertz anyway. So, it's just, it's a kind of an interesting topic, load line calibration is. But generally, yeah, my recommendation is if you're overclocking and your motherboard has load line calibration settings, set it to medium. Like, set it to the middle level. Like on an ASRock motherboard, you'll have levels that go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On ASRock boards, I recommend 2 and 3. This one, like, it's not as bad as like what I've drawn out here. I tested one, but it does give you a little bit of overshoot. If you are on ROG boards, which I think they go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I would keep myself around, well, this range. And actually, I think they go up to 8. But yeah, you should always stay around the middle levels. Gigabyte motherboards, always just stick to medium. Extreme LLC on those is, extreme. Let's put it that way. And, MSI boards, I can't currently remember what their naming scheme is, but generally just stay around the middle ground. If you do know what you're doing, then, knock yourself out. Configure the LLC to give you completely flat voltage if you can figure out how to do that. But under most scenarios, you should be, for ASRock, you should be looking at around 2, 3 level, Asus 4, 5, Gigabyte medium, and MSI I can't remember right now. I think medium as well for them. There's really no need for using the higher levels. Though, if you can find reliable information on the internet, like there are, I think Der Bauer recently did a review of a bunch of low-end Z370 motherboards, and he actually went and measured what kind of voltages the various LLCs will get you. So if you can get that kind of information, then actually just use that information to figure out what LLC settings you want to run. But if you don't know, stick to the sort of middle ground, because that's the safest. Because if you run like, if you unknowingly shove 1.57 volts into your CPU, well, you're not going to have a CPU very long. So, that's basically what you need to keep in mind with LLC. If you're not bumping up against the max safe voltage of your CPU, I would straight up recommend against messing with LLC at all. Because ultimately, as long as you're not going over max safe voltage at idle, you don't have to worry about the droop that much, right? Because as long as it's true, because if your cooling system is not capable of handling over, like if your cooling system wasn't capable of handling over 1.35 volts, well, this configuration right here works great for you. Sure, your idle voltage is a bit high, but it's not like that's going to kill it. Like, that's not dangerous. This is really, really dangerous. This is perfectly normal, actually. That's why it's called stock. That's how Intel configures their CPUs out of the box. Pretty much. Except, of course, this voltage would be a lot lower, but, it's, it is that kind of situation. Now, obviously, if you had a cooling system that was good for 1.4 and not good for 1.4, then you'd have to set like 1.5, and then it gets a bit dicey, but, I personally would recommend just stay on the safe side, and even then just stick to medium. And you might be wondering, like, why can't we just use software readings? I've run into motherboards where, like, the software readings are just, like, miles away from reality. There are motherboards where the software voltage readings are very accurate and you can rely on them. And then there's motherboards out there where the software might as well be reading at, like, I don't know, it might like, just pulling numbers out of thin air, pretty much. It's really bad on some motherboards. And on those boards, it's like, if those have LLC settings, then pray that you don't, that the medium setting is actually medium and not extreme, because you're like, yeah, there's just no way to know for sure that you're not going to destroy your chip. So yeah, that pretty much covers, I think, what you need to know about load line calibration. I think I've actually gone a bit overboard. But I think you get the idea, right? Load line calibration is, well, the load line is Intel's way of specifying adaptive CPU, adaptive voltage for their VRMs. It is done to basically help with voltage tolerance on VRMs, because you don't get actual flat line voltage output. You get spikes and ripple, and you want to keep that below your maximum voltage tolerance. And load line calibration, the actual load line calibration setting, allows you to adjust the load line from the stock setting to be closer to completely flat. And under ideal, and my recommended setting would be something that droops a little bit under load. Don't go up a bit under load. That's just, no. Droop a little bit. Always safer. It's always safer if your voltage is going down than going up. If it's going up, then, you might have a very bad day one day. If it's going down, unless your idle voltage is super high, you're going to be fine. So, yeah. That's it for load line calibration. I hope you learned something. I hope it made sense. I don't know how successful I was on that part. I hope I protect your CPU from extreme LLC, though there are some motherboards where extreme LLC does actually work properly. But again, it's just not worth the risk, in my opinion. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below or any questions you have. If you would like to support what we do here at, with Gamers Nexus, there's a Patreon link down in the description below. And if you would like to watch, see more extreme overclocking kind of content, like more VRM stuff and other overclocking ridiculousness, I have my own channel called Actually Hardcore Overclocking. You can go check that out. I imagine there will be a link down in the comments below for that. So, once again, thank you for watching, and see you next time. If you would like to support what we do here with Gamer, what we do here with Gamer... throw the outro out the window.